I'm going to ask the three panelists to come up here so they can better respond to questions. Invite you to go to the microphones. And while you're all getting in line, I'm going to take the prerogative of asking the first questions and just ask whether there are key points of the collaborative agreements between academia, industry, and actually government as well. Are those in the public domain, or at least parts of it? To what extent do both industry and academia say, no, this is something we want to keep as a trade secret and not have widely disseminated?
So I think, Mike, that question is to me. In terms of NCATs, we are trying to make it as publicly transparent as possible. So wherever the agreements can be made public in terms of the template, we put them on the website. So the MOU that NIH has, the different CRA templates, as well as potential things that industry and academics can go with, we put them on the website. Okay. And we are available for advice or suggestions based on our experience. And
Heather and Gabriella, can I ask from your perspective?
Well, I think some of these arrangements have been public. I think one thing that's very interesting that we're seeing is a change in how academic institutions are thinking about IP. And we saw a very dramatic slide earlier about the amount of money that comes in from royalty streams to certain institutions. It's actually a very small number of actual inventions or discoveries that there are occasionally a big blockbuster hit. And I think, but for the most part, those IP agreements that are so hard to negotiate and sometimes make these collaborations fall apart, most of the time don't lead to big returns for the institution. And I think what we're seeing is academic institutions seeing the value of collaborating with industry as something different and bigger than filling in the bottom line.
Okay, but do they make the essence of the agreements available publicly? Or
sometimes, but I think it's often, from what we're hearing, often on the industry side that keeps those as trade secrets.
Gabriella, would you like to comment?
Well, I don't think I'm able to comment on this specific question just because of the organization. I don't have the opportunity to be involved in that specific topic.
Okay. We have a number of... Yeah, please, and then we'll go to the people who want to ask questions. Make your comment.
I think this afternoon we have a speech by the Autumn president, and he probably might be able to share some of the ways Autumn is trying to make some of this information widely disseminatable through conferences, as well as workshops and reports that Autumn puts out on an annual basis.
In a sense, it would be nice not to have to reinvent the wheel if there are best practices or lessons learned. Sharon Terry? I'm sorry, you should introduce yourself.
Yes, Sharon Terry from Genetic Alliance. So I'm going to push this question of money and finances again, because I think there were threads of that in each of your presentations, and ask, so I think it's easy again to go to money because it's easy to measure, number one. Two is we have a kind of interesting relationship as people to money. I think we're much, if I asked each of you to disclose something about your health, you probably would be okay with that. But if I said, could you tell me your annual salary right now on this webcast and with these people, you probably don't want to do that. So there's a kind of a conflict within us as people around money, I think. What I would like us to explore is, for example, Balki, in your slide you showed there's not so much problem in conflict of interest between NIH and a researcher. Well, there's a transfer of money there. So there is money involved, but we don't seem to have too much trouble about why a researcher would want that money, get that money, use that money. And we don't, if I go to the doctor, I don't ask how many NIH grants do you have and how much funding do you have. It probably goes, Heather, to some of your vision around public trust. And Gabriella, I think some of your discussion around the financial line was longer than all the rest, but we don't really have good measures for the rest. So I guess I want to push us to start to delve deeper in here and talk about how can we start to find the evidence we need, because I think we're interested in the outcome. Are we impacting innovation? Are we impacting patient lives? Are we impacting health? And what are we not seeing if we stay focused just on money, or should we actually be looking at money in other contexts as well?
Go.
A great question, and I think as others have said earlier, with most of these policies, transparency initiatives, regulations, we focus on money and use money as a proxy for thinking about bias and objectivity. There is not great data and research on whether that's the right way to go, but it is something that's measurable. I would suggest that we not try to see how can we replicate this same structure with other types of interests, right? It would be not only very difficult to write and implement a regulation that says, let's look at your real conflict, which is you really want to get this published because that's going to lead to tenure. That's a very significant conflict, but I don't think that means we need to come up with a similar regulatory scheme. Instead, I think as some of the earlier commenters have suggested, we need to take a step back and say, transparency about financial relationships is important, we should know about them, but are we actually getting at bias, at objectivity? Are there other things, other mechanisms that we think are important, such as third-party analysis of data and those kinds of pieces where we can get be more confident that we're actually having an impact on what is the outcome of the research?
Yeah, Balki.
From the NIH perspective, I think there are two words. One is peer review and transparency. I think those are two things which I think become valuable in a lot of settings, non-financial as well as financial. So whenever the NIH academic relationship is considered, even though money is being transferred, it's a very transparent peer-reviewed process. And I think that makes a huge difference in terms of who gets the grants, for what are they doing, they're publishing. So there's a lot of transparency, as well as the fact that other peers who are involved in the same business have a voice in terms of who gets selected for what, who gets the glory, who gets the dips at the next big part of the money. So I think those kind of things, I don't know how you put that in a formalized sense in a one-off relationship between an academic and a pharmaceutical. If there is some way of some sort of a peer review, that might help.
Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question and very difficult to find an answer. When we look at financial interest, and I really like moving away from financial interest to financial relationship, it really focuses more on the relationship. And as we are as people, so we have that attachment to financial, but also we have attachment to other things that are belong more in our professional and personal sphere. And I still think that those can sometimes be even more powerful than a financial relationship. So you bring the peer review. Well, this peer review, even maybe they kind of pass the conflict of interest policy within the NIH not having ties to the industry, they might still have their scientific views that could drive comments in a review process, which are not necessarily tied to industry. So I think still the professional and the personal interest can really have a lot of impact on medical innovation.
Hi, Jill Hartzler-Warner. I'm Acting Associate Commissioner for Special Medical Programs at FDA, and one of the groups that I oversee is our Advisory Committee Oversight and Management staff. I just wanted to make a comment about some of Gabriella's information, and I think one of the things that we are going to be reporting on is actually looking more, so we'll have data on this, looking more at the reasons that people do not serve that are invited to our advisory committees. And actually what's very interesting, and we do focus on financial interests. And so, when somebody has a disqualifying financial interest, that's when they may not serve unless they're granted a waiver. But what's interesting is that we find overwhelmingly the reason that people do not serve is schedule conflicts, not financial conflicts. So I think the data will be interesting. We were actually not able to identify a single meeting that was canceled because of disqualifying financial interests. So that data will be collected during this fiscal year, and so will be available when we do our annual report. So it will be a little bit of a time lag, but hopefully that'll provide some good information. Thanks.
So I think it's very important, and I really appreciate the communication and keeping the channel open, because there is a difference of who gets invited versus who not gets invited, and that's the first cut. And we don't see who doesn't get invited at all, even before getting to the conflict of interest policy. So, looking the whole process will really help. And I agree with you that some of the reasons are, time, policy, and what we have seen is also the stigma. So, they might say, I don't have time, but it's more, I really want to do it. So it's I really would like to continue talking, because I think it's important to keep that open channel and understanding what are the issues really, to really, better find solution together.
Right, and I should say, I think that the chilling effect, if you will, of people saying, I don't even want to mess with this, it's too complex, or it's too concerning to my reputation, that is something that's very difficult to quantify, and
Yes.
And certainly would be interested in looking at ways to try to capture that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I could comment on that, and I say it with, firstly, a tremendous amount of respect for the FDA and the challenge that they have to face. But my own experience recently was pretty amazing in terms of the conflict of interest issues. So we've been meeting with the director of the devices that handles neurosurgical devices, which is an enormous industry, if you will. And she felt that it was very hard to get practicing academic or private neurosurgeons to really participate as reviewers in the FDA process. So we talked about that, and I offered that since we're in Baltimore, that I would certainly serve on the advisory panel if that would be of help to them. And since I'd gone through it myself with treatments for brain tumors, I thought that I could be of help in that. And they were very happy, and they chose me to be on an advisory panel last year. And there were two products that were being discussed. One was a pipeline for vascular giant aneurysms that has changed. Neurosurgery was approved about 10 years ago in Europe, not been approved in the United States, and it got approval through that advisory panel. The other was a new brain tumor treatment. So they were very happy that I would serve on that because I'm a brain tumor specialist, and I've been through the FDA with brain tumor treatments. The Conflict of Interest Committee, first of all, spent innumerable telephone calls and asked for more and more information. What my wife's disclosure information, my children's, are they involved with companies, who's involved? And everything is pristine, and I have absolutely no financial or equity conflicts with any company doing anything with brain tumors. And then after all of that, through the process, I said, I'm really dedicated to doing this because they are really, really annoying in terms of how much information. And my wife was upset with me, in fact, because she said, where is this being disclosed? Where is this going out to? And I said, I want to do this. They disqualified me. And they disqualified me for the brain tumor procedure. And I said, it's okay. I could use the day at work. But what's your reasoning? Because I have zero financial. And they said, well, you have an academic conflict of interest because the treatment that you developed, which is gliadel, and I'll talk about this afternoon, if this new treatment were to be approved, it would compete with your treatment that you have developed and taken through the FDA process. And therefore, if you vote against it, somebody might say that the only reason you voted against it was because it enhances no financial interest, not a penny, but it enhances your academic, reputation and work, which is not, it's off my radar screen. So I thought it was astounding. And then I went back to the person at the FDA, and she was mortified. I mean, she said it's out of control, and it's totally out of their control. This is a separate panel of lawyers that do the conflict of interest. That's not, it's intentionally kept separate from them. So I did go to the panel, and I ruled on something that I haven't taken care of a patient in 25 years, although I'm a board-certified neurosurgeon, so it's better than nobody, but I haven't treated an aneurysm in 25 years, but I was okay as an expert for that. And then the area that I live and breathe and know more about than the very few people who've been through all the different aspects of understanding what a patient needs and what regulatory agencies need, I was disqualified with. So I think we need to fix the system, even though the intentions are good, in terms of how it actually works. In my own very narrow experience, how it actually works. And it has nothing to do with financial, at least in my own individual case, had nothing to do with equity, finances, or anything like that.
Jill, would you like to comment, please?
And I don't want to get into in a particular discussion about a particular case, but one of the difficult things that FDA has to reconcile is that we are under the federal conflict of interest requirements that apply to all government employees. So when an individual gets invited to advisory committee meeting, they're invited as typically most members are invited. The scientific, academic, and technical members are invited as special government employees. So they're held to the same standards as regular government employees with a few exceptions. And one of the things we have to look at is competing products, if you will, issues and products that might compete with the product at issue that's going to be discussed by the advisory committee. So that may be difficult to understand. We've tried to make some of these policies transparent in our guidance documents. Clearly, it's not always easy to understand, but the point is that we're following the laws and regulations, and that's kind of what we have to do. That's what Congress has said applies to FDA advisory committees.
While people are jumping up, Jill, as long as you're, let me come back to you later with another question. Paul, and then Neil. And please identify yourself, because this is being transcribed, I think, somewhere, and they want to.
So I might be talking about the TSA here, but let's talk about FDA and NIH. I've served on a variety of advisory committees, both at HHS generally. I'm on the FDA Science Board now, and also on an advisory committee to the VA. And every year, I'm asked to make a series of disclosures to those committees. Those disclosures are vetted in far different ways at each one. They're all federal committees. Two of them are administered through HHS, yet there's no harmonization of the requirements. In my view, they're probably actually governed under similar law, but the interpretation and the actualization of those requirements I experience as quite different. So one thing we could actually practically recommend is a single standard across federal agencies.
I want to get back to your original question about the public disclosure.
By the way.
Neil Cohen, yes. About the disclosure and this issue. And I think a lot of what we're struggling with respect to disclosure, with respect to making decisions about who serves on an advisory board, is purely a risk-benefit analysis. And the problem is that the risk and benefit is being assessed by the lawyers who are not involved in the dialogue about what we're trying to accomplish. And the lawyers should be providing advice and counsel to the leadership in making the decisions, but often their advice and counsel is taken as dogma because institutions, whether they're industry or academic institutions, are very risk averse. And they're risk averse to having some article on the front page of the newspaper challenging what's happened. In the case of the neurosurgeon on the advisory board, the company that, if the board makes a decision not to approve their product, the company will probably sue, claiming that they cannot, that the process was either flawed or that they cannot commercialize a product that they think is warranted of commercialization. So we've got to get beyond this risk-benefit analysis, or beyond the legal assessment of the risk-benefit analysis, to decision makers who are able to say, yes, there is risk associated with this, disclose what that risk is, not in terms of the commercialization risk, but the overall risk to the organization or to the affiliation relationship, but that the benefit to society, to patients, warrants taking that risk. And we haven't gotten to that point of the discussion yet. We're very much risk averse, both academics and industry, in pursuing these relationships without recognizing that there is more benefit to be gained than risk to be sought.
So if I can just take the crowd, come on up to the mic. We've got empty space here. So I just add to what Neil said. I think in addition to thinking about things in risk-benefit terms, we also need to make that reasoning transparent to other stakeholders, whether in the academic institution or patients, patient advocacy groups, and the public. Is that mic actually on, Jill? Okay, why don't you try? Is that?
This one on?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Go, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, a dialogue around this is very important. The other point I should make in terms of the competing interests, for example, if you have a product that's being discussed and there are some other products out there being in the pipeline that may compete with it, there hasn't been a whole lot of research done in this area, but the little bit that we have shows that these actually may be more problematic than financial interests in the company, in the product that's actually under discussion. So, I think that, I would particularly be interested in looking at other agencies' interpretations and applications of the same policy, because certainly we can learn something there. Go forward with more of a harmonized approach.
Another question or comment?
I think another thing to keep in mind.
Please identify
sorry,
yourself.
Michelle McMurray Heath, FDA. I think another thing to keep in mind is that these advisory committees or panels are federal advisory committees. They're providing formal recommendations on policy to an agency. So that's a different standard. But we also need other access to expertise. We need scientific expertise, we need clinical expertise in a lot of our decision making, and also just to inform the review and scientific staff at the agency. So we can think about different ways to get that expertise in when you're not in the context of taking a vote on a formal federal advisory committee. So, but I do agree that hopefully we could streamline the process so it's more aligned with other federal agencies too.
Okay, I invite others to come with questions and comments.
So this does not go to the FDA advisory panels, but to some comments that underline both part of your presentation and in the comments here. We, I think, do a very good job in communicating the risk of conflicts of interest. I think that we've been good at identifying what that is, what the problems are, and what the negative outcomes can be. We as a community do not do as good a job in talking about the benefit, and that effective collaboration and innovative collaboration between academia, government, and industry is not just something we should put up with or something that we might as well figure out how to do. It's really essential in moving things forward. I would commend to you all Scott Page's work on diversity, in which he makes a very compelling argument that for very hard problems, not easy ones where you just get the right experts in the room, but for very hard, very complicated problems, you need a huge diversity of opinion, training, background, etc. And if we are not pulling together the best resources from our academic scientists, from our industry-trained scientists, and pulling together the resources that each can bring to the equation, we're missing out, and not just not in small ways, but in really profound ways that affect discovery and health ultimately. And we have not done a good job in making that a compelling story.
Okay. Gabriella and Balki?
I can follow up on that. I mean, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's very important to point out that in any of these risk-benefit analysis, it really depends on who drives the process. I think if scientists drive the process, as we do at NCATS, we bring the lawyers in later, much later, once the outlines of a collaboration have been agreed on. I think then what happens is the benefits are much more intensely pointed to, rather than what the risks are. The risks are important to mitigate wherever you can, but whatever we try to do is ensure that any of the committees have a 4 to 5 excess of scientists compared to lawyers, just so that they have a stronger voice, they have an earlier voice, and they have a more agenda-driving voice. So that once they have come to some sort of an agreement, the lawyers try to figure out how to do it, how to make it happen. And that's what happened with the therapeutics discovery program with the industry, with the 8 partners coming in. The scientists were brought into the room, the Pfizer scientists, the BMS scientists, the NIH scientists. They were all brought into the room and asked, what happens with these medicines in the attics? What do you typically do with them? What are your concerns? Why are you not, why are you not amenable to leaving them out in the public? And we heard them out. And we said, okay, those are important concerns. How would the NIH scientists respond to that? Using all that information, we tried to come up with model template agreements, which were then, which then got lawyer input. I think we kind of got it right, luckily, at that time, and hopefully we can use that as a model moving forward.
I'm going to ask, if I may, Jill, ask you one other question. I think we all agree that it's really essential, vital, that FDA and government agencies have really access to the top flight experts. You talked about sort of what happens when once people are invited, do they accept the invitation and why not? Do you have any information on earlier parts in the pipeline of people being approached? Are you willing to be considered sort of phase? Are people now less willing to even sort of be considered as opposed to accepting once they're offered the position? Or anyone from any other government agency as well?
So at FDA, we do a sort of a pre-screening when we start looking at potential experts, and so that is really to get the broad brush of things that might come up. And if somebody has lots of consulting contracts that span sort of the range of companies and topics that we anticipate that the committee is going to be looking at over the next 4 years, if they've got stock holdings that are in excess of of certain amounts, those are the kind of things that and then this is done largely by the centers at FDA. They make decisions, is it worth pursuing? Is it not worth pursuing? So there is that level. But once somebody is sort of goes through that sort of pre-screening level, then typically the centers will bring them on as special government employees, and they'll be on the books at FDA, if you will, as special government employees. And that is part of the pool of experts from which we can draw from, from our advisory committees. Typically, there's kind of a two-system or dual-tiered approach. There are the folks that are brought in as the permanent members for the 4-year terms on the advisory committees, and then there are also people that are brought in as temporary members for particular meetings to contribute particular expertise to that topic. So typically the way it works is that somebody who's on, who's been an SGE for a while, they might have sat in, or they might have participated as a member in several meetings before they're actually invited to become a permanent member, because there's a lot of other aspects to advisory committee membership that are important besides that technical expertise. Of course, there's the ability to work on the problems with the group and contribute positively to the meeting, lead a meeting, for example, for the chair. So that's kind of the way that the system works to some extent. And then we do also look at, in terms of pulling in expertise on particular topics, we look at other government employees, for example, NIH, CDC, sometimes special government employees that are on other governments' lists as well. So we can pull them easier. But the process actually to get somebody to go through and be a special government employee does take some time. So that's why we have to kind of build up our lists. So that's helpful.
Okay, so I think our circadian clocks are in the pre-prandial lag phase. So I think we should adjourn for lunch. And Adam, what are the logistics? We have our next session is scheduled to begin at 1:10. And I don't know how you want to handle what the lunch arrangements are. Lunch is outside in this atrium here. Why don't you come up to the... Want to start at 1? Sort of we start at 1. Reward ourselves.
So we have lunch available out in the atrium. You're welcome to go out and get those. For speakers and planning committee members, we are meeting separately. So I've already sent you an email about that. So just go ahead and pick up your lunch and bring it with you. We'll go ahead and get started about 10 minutes early at 1 o'clock. So.
1 o'clock. I have a conflict of interest. I'm trying to catch a plane, so I want to end on time.